Hello again, I'm your host John, and welcome to another edition of the Subcontinent, the program that explores all issues and matters related to 7 countries in South Asia. So sit back, relax, and let's start the show.
In this edition of the Subcontinent, we will be examining the case of Rohingya persecution brought by Gambia against Myanmar in the International Court of Justice. And we shall look into the much controversial commercial surrogacy of India.
The persecution of Muslim Rohingya minority of Myanmar has been an astonishing crisis that the world has witnessed over the past few years. Their future still remains uncertain, even after the Gambia brought Myanmar to the International Court of Justice over gross human rights violations by the Myanmar military and government. Even though the ruling was in Rohingya community's favor, justice is far from sight, as over 1 million Rohingya still remain not only stateless, but live under dire conditions in crowded, makeshift camps in Bangladesh.
Gambia brought the genocide case against Myanmar to the World Court of Justice. In the case, Myanmar was indicated for trying to destroy the Rohingya as a group in whole or in part by the use of mass murder, rape, and other forms of sexual violence. The military forces of Myanmar have raped and killed scores of Rohingya. Over 700,000 were pressured to leave the country in the ruthless crackdown in 2017. Many fled to Bangladesh, where as many as 1.1 million Rohingya now live in temporary camps. In January 2020, the United Nations International Court of Justice ruled in favor of Gambia. The court's ruling reinforces the universality of human rights and the rule of law. It has ordered Myanmar to protect Rohingya Muslims from genocide using all measures possible in its power.
The Republic of the Union of Myanmar shall, in accordance with its obligations under the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, in relation to the members of the Rohingya group in its territory, take all measures within its power to prevent the commission of all acts within the scope of Article 2 of the Convention.
The court's precedent-setting ruling called the remaining 600,000 Rohingya in Myanmar extremely vulnerable to military violence. Over 20 years ago, the Norwegian Nobel Committee awarded Aung San Suu Kyi the Nobel Peace Prize for her non-violent defiance against Myanmar military. She was also awarded the Sakharov Prize for Freedom of Thought. However, now she is defending the very military that she was imprisoned by when she requested that the court drop the genocide charges in 2019.
Myanmar requests the court to remove the case from its list.
This ruling against Myanmar begs the question, can the ICJ really do anything? Well, the ICJ rulings are binding, but there is no enforceability mechanism to ensure that the states follow through and act in accordance with the rulings. Some say that the ruling has only helped in highlighting the issue internationally. This reminds us of a system where the oppressed can only hope for a miracle, but Western imperial powers under the garb of human rights can enter and destroy any opposing country they wish while keeping their oppressive, totalitarian allies such as Suu Kyi in strength.
Myanmar is scheduled to report back to the ICJ at the end of May 2020 and every 6 months after that. The court ruling comes on the heels of Myanmar's elections. Whether the court order is enforced may be influenced by the internal political atmosphere. The government is obligated to report its actions taken to stop cruelties against the Rohingya. But this is proving difficult, as government authorities and Myanmar's legal team have called into question the legitimacy and jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice. So the enforcement of the court ruling and Myanmar's reports to the tribunal will be dependent on the influence of international pressure. Refugees have made it clear that they do not wish to return to Myanmar under current conditions. They want assurance that the situation will be handled and that they can be safe with their rights protected in Myanmar. The horrors still continue in Myanmar for the remaining Rohingya in Rakhine State as more evidence begins to pile up regarding violence and torture by the military and Rakhine rebels against the Rohingya. There are still hundreds of Rohingya lost at sea and many more living in refugee camps awaiting justice.
To discuss this issue further, we are now joined by Mr. Ne San Lin. He's a Rohingya activist and a blogger. Mr. Lin, welcome to the show. I'll jump straight into the question. What steps has the government of Myanmar taken with regard to the ICJ ruling?
Myanmar is pretending as if they are complying the ruling of the court, but in reality, in the ground, nothing has been changed yet. Since after the ruling of the court on January 23rd, many Rohingya have been killed amid the fighting between Arakan Army, which is representing Rakhine Buddhists, and the Myanmar military. And also Rohingya are targeted by the Myanmar military, and some of them were killing from very short distance. So I would say nothing has changed after the court ruling of the International Court of Justice.
So why is the court ruling of the ICJ considered significant?
We have been suffering brutal oppression by the Burmese military and the government since 1978. It has been more than 42 years now. We don't even know how many thousands of Rohingya have been killed, how many thousands of Rohingya women and girls have been raped by the Burmese military since the operation has begun in 1978. So basically, we deserve the justice. We want the country system, the policy against us is discriminating everywhere. So we want to change the system. For that, the ruling of the International Court of Justice is very significantly important. And also the criminal who have ordered to kill the Rohingya, who have ordered to rape the Rohingya women, who have ordered to destroy the Rohingya villages, they should be tried at the International Criminal Court. So we want justice from both international court.
Yes, even in the international media, the Rohingya crisis came under spotlight, especially after the ICJ ruling. I think it's important that we see how they've covered this situation so far, and then we can continue with the question and answer session.
Myanmar's Ministry of Foreign Affairs said its own commission, the Independent Commission of Inquiry, found that there had been no genocide in Rakhine State. Myanmar's legal team also argued that because of the country's reservations on the Genocide Convention, the ICJ has no jurisdiction over this case. We urge Myanmar to implement these measures immediately and call on all nations to support this independent judicial process. Oxfam's head of humanitarian campaigns, Fiona Smith. The chances of Aung San Suu Kyi implementing this ruling will be zero unless significant international pressure is applied. The Security Council has not taken significant action on Myanmar, in part because of Russia and China's apparent willingness to use their vetoes to shield the Myanmar's government and military, HRW said.
Thank you, Mr. Lin, for staying with us, and welcome back, audience. So, Mr. Lin, how would the ICJ and international pressure affect domestic politics in line of the upcoming election with regard to enforcement of the court ruling?
As I mentioned earlier, nothing has changed. So the court ruling of this provisional measure didn't make any change in the ground. And in this election, in upcoming election, the both ruling party and the opposition party will use the Rohingya card as like the other right-wing politicians across the world who are using the Islamophobia as a tool to win in the election. So same like, you know, those politicians, Myanmar politicians will use the Rohingya as a tool to win in the election. And about 600,000 remaining Rohingya will not have the right to vote and right to be elected. So we had the the right to vote and right to be elected until 2015. In 2015, we were disenfranchised, but I don't see this is not going to change anytime soon.
All right, what about the Rohingya refugees? How have they responded to the ICJ court ruling?
The Rohingya refugee, we call the genocide survivor in the Bangladesh camp, they have responded very positively because they are the people who fled from the killing field, who their family member were killed, children were killed, so they really want the justice. So they think that they will get the justice through this international court. And I was in the court when the judge delivered this order, the provisional measure. I thought the justice was partially solved, but still a long way to go. I hope in about 3 hours of time we will have the final verdict from the International Court of Justice. Myanmar must pay back what they have committed the crime against us.
Yes, absolutely. Justice should be served. Mr. Lin, thank you so much for being with us and sharing your views. Let's just take a look at how social media sees this situation, and then we can move on to the next segment.
Anonymous says Gambia has filed a federal suit to prove Rohingya genocide case at the International Court of Justice. Kenneth Roth has talked about a harrowing video of Rohingya refugees watching the International Court of Justice ruling and thinks that Myanmar needs to be protected from further atrocities. Ali H. Warsame expresses admiration for the Gambian justice who fought for generations and brought Aung San Suu Kyi to The Hague for her country's Rohingya genocide.
Thousands of surrogate babies are born in India every year. This country has often been called the surrogacy hub of the world, where infertile couples pay local women to carry their embryos through to birth. Commercial surrogacy is very controversial. First of all, the industry is still highly unregulated, so there is a major concern for the safety of the child and even the surrogate. Secondly, the United Nations Human Rights Commission has warned that commercial surrogacy usually amounts to the sale of children.
Until a few years ago, India was known globally as a hub for commercial surrogacy. Scores of couples who were unable to have children of their own were turning to Indian commercial surrogacy as a source for expanding their families. With thousands of fertility clinics in the country, the industry is a source of both controversy and hope. Since it was legalized in 2002, India's controversial export industry was transforming lives for impoverished Indian women. It was a business worth billions of dollars, fueled in part by tax breaks to encourage medical tourism. India seized on what is called assistive reproductive technology and opened the door for customers worldwide. There were an estimated 3,000 surrogacy centers in the country. One estimation had about 25,000 babies were born by Indian surrogates, more than 12,000 for Western clients in 2015. Baby! In no time, it has become a lucrative industry which is highly unregulated and in numerous centers lacks safety and transparency. The majority of surrogates are women living in poverty who see no other choice than to become a surrogate in order to provide for their families. Most surrogate mothers come from the slums and would receive up to $15,000 per pregnancy. The cost of surrogacy in India is up to $21,000, while in the US it would cost up to $130,000.
India banned foreign commercial surrogacy in 2015. This means that only Indian citizens can now opt for this service in the country. But surrogacy in India is still very controversial. The Modi cabinet in February 2020 decided to accept a bill to allow married couples and single women to use surrogate mothers. This bill replaced an earlier version which limited the service only to infertile Indian couples who could ask only a female relative. Some argue that the latter option would have been better for India, even if it would have been restrictive for some.
But why has commercial surrogacy been in the spotlight? Initially, this business was propagated in the absence of a law. It was unknown whether numerous surrogates received proper care and medical treatment which they deserved. Also, there were little records on who the parents seeking surrogates were. This issue was problematic as sometimes children born by surrogates were abandoned or disowned by parents. The synergy of parents' need for children and surrogate mothers' need for income caused agencies and middlemen to take advantage of these needs, often creating corruption and endangering surrogate mothers' lives. Also, there was little regulation on whether surrogates actually received the money they were promised by agencies which was paid by the clients. The Surrogacy Regulation Bill was passed, but there are still many amendments waiting to be implemented. The legislation completely bans commercial surrogacy and considerably limits altruistic surrogacy. The proposed law would punish malpractices, exploitation and abandonment of children and exploitation of surrogate mothers. Some are concerned that impoverished women who choose a career in surrogacy will be left with no other choices of income. While commercial surrogacy may seem as morally questionable, it was a significant source of income for many women in India. Replacing this source of income for the hundreds of thousands of surrogates is the next challenge.
To add more insight, we have an international human rights activist and a lawyer at the Supreme Court of India, Ms. Karuna Nandi. Welcome to the show. So why is this recent surrogacy bill significant?
The reason the commercial surrogacy bill of 2019 is extremely significant is because it makes commercial surrogacy illegal, firstly. Secondly, it takes away from single mothers the ability to have a surrogate in order to have a child. And thirdly, that even a married couple must wait for a period of 5 years and not have another child in order to avail of even altruistic surrogacy.
All right, what is then problematic about this bill?
The main driving force behind it was to limit the exploitation of commercial surrogates. But nobody really asked the commercial surrogates. Take, for example, a situation where I am a mother who, say, wants medical treatment for my family member, for my child, and I don't have the money for that. In a society that doesn't have the ability or the willingness to, but not the ability perhaps, to expand my choices and to enable me to get that very expensive, say, treatment for my child, the best treatment. Maybe I want to go to a very good hospital and not just a government hospital. In such a society, would it be right to constrain my choices further and disable me from having a surrogate, giving birth to a child through surrogacy and making that money if there is no health damage to my body? If I am otherwise a healthy woman, if I haven't otherwise given birth to surrogates. Now the thing is that, of course, there is also a lot of exploitation that happens. This is very important to remember, right? But until we ask the people who we are purporting to speak for, how can we know in what way the exploitation happens and what is required to be done to curb the exploitation, or whether the practice should be done away with entirely? That kind of survey and that kind of study hasn't really been done. So I think this is a really significant problem with the bill.
All right, Ms. Nandi, for more analysis, I would like you to see how global media has followed through with the surrogate industry of India. And then we can come back to the question answer session.
Women from economically backward sections earn 10 years' worth their salary by renting their wombs. New Delhi says the legislation is aimed at dismantling the booming rent-to-womb industry that is estimated to be worth some 3.3 billion euros annually. A particularly heart-rending case, the baby was born with Down syndrome to a surrogate and was rejected by his parents-to-be. The surrogate mother brought up the child. The Union Cabinet approved the Surrogacy Regulation Bill 2020, allowing a willing woman to be a surrogate mother. The bill would benefit widows and divorced women, besides infertile Indian couples. Commercial surrogacy will be prohibited, and ethical surrogacy to Indian married couples and Indian single women will be allowed on fulfillment of certain conditions.
Okay, welcome back to the show. Ms. Nandi, some critics argue that the proposed bill is unconstitutional as it violates personal liberties guaranteed in the Indian Constitution. What is your opinion on that?
Look, I'm a lawyer, so I could argue both sides, but I'm presuming that what they're adverting to, what they're pointing to, is the fact that women under our Constitution have a right to our own bodies. That Article 21, the right to life, is also the right to bodily integrity, the right to autonomy. This is something that has been explicitly articulated by 9 judges of our Supreme Court in the Justice Puttaswamy judgment. The right to autonomy is not something that is fully exercised in such situations because there's a kind of economic coercion that comes in and there's a kind of familial coercion that comes in. So I think that this is something that could be argued both ways. But as I said previously, I think the decision here should be in the hands of the people that are sought to be protected, which is the commercial surrogates. I think that is the most important thing. But also let us not forget that there is an Article 14 problem. And Article 14 in our Constitution is the right to equality, the right for similarly placed people to be treated similarly.
Could you please elaborate more on the Article 14 and how it relates to all of this?
If a married couple who has only been married, say, 1 year and knows that they cannot conceive, wants to have a child, versus a married couple that that has been married for 5 years, say, right, and knows that they can't have children and they want to have a child, what is the difference there? Why should the couple who has been married 5 years be privileged over the couple that has been married 1 year? Secondly, there is lots of evidence to demonstrate that single mothers by choice are equally good parents to married couples. This is a little more controversial. So I think that there are these various constitutional problems in this bill which have not been addressed and have not been thought out. But the trouble is that to challenge such a bill after the fact, after it's been passed, is much more difficult than having a constitutional bill drafted in the first place.
I would reserve my opinions on that. But thank you, Ms. Nandi, for being with us and sharing your views. Let's see how social media sees this situation before we end this program.
Matthew has tweeted about India's restrictions on fertility tourism, underlining that $400 million per year are being spent by couples from abroad. Samriti Z. Irani believes that India has brought most progressive legislators in the world to support women's reproductive rights. Narendra Modi says the bill will regulate surrogacy across India and prohibits commercial surrogacy.
And that was our episode covering the ICJ ruling in favor of Rohingya and the Indian surrogate industry. To watch bits of our episodes and more updates, follow us on our social media platforms and make sure to give us feedback about what you think. We'll meet the same time, same day next week. Thanks for watching.